They say blood is sacred, but greed is the deadliest acid. I spent my entire youth playing the silent benefactor for my family. That ended the night my security camera caught two men robbing my living room. Guiding them was my own mother, wearing my grandmother's sapphire, an heirloom supposedly stolen 10 years ago. When the woman who birthed you orchestrates your ruin, you do not cry, you freeze your heart. Hello, dear listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your continuous support and for being such a wonderful community. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the necessary budget to operate, which means we are forced to stop uploading new videos here and will be transitioning our work entirely over to Patreon. If you find today's story compelling, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel, where you can listen to even better, longer, and more detailed exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube, featuring multiple emotional voice actors bringing the scenes to life. You can join our community right now by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link down in the video description or the pinned comment. Let us begin today's dark journey. My name is Simone Hester, and I am 34 years old. The fluorescent lights above my cubicle at Aegis Horizon Logistics buzzed with a relentless, hollow hum. It was nearly 10 o'clock at night, and I was the only soul left on the entire fourth floor. The air conditioning pumped a steady stream of artificial chill into the room, but the real cold was about to come from the sleek black smartphone resting next to my keyboard. A harsh, sharp chime shattered the office silence. I glanced down. A bright red banner flashed across the lock screen with a system warning. Motion detected in the living room. A frown creased my forehead. I lived alone, and I had definitely armed the security system before leaving for my 12-hour shift. I swiped the notification, letting the live camera feed load. For a split second, the screen was a blur of gray pixels. Then, the high-definition lens focused, and my heart slammed against my ribs so hard I physically gasped. Two men were inside my house. They were dressed in dark clothing, their faces partially obscured by baseball caps. I watched in sheer, paralyzed horror as they systematically tore through my sanctuary. One of them was violently yanking out the drawers of my oak entertainment center, tossing my expensive electronics into heavy black duffel bags. The other was pulling down the custom velvet curtains to wrap up my antique mantel clocks. Panic, raw and suffocating, seized my throat. My hands shook violently as my thumb hovered over the emergency SOS button on my screen to dial 911. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. I was about to summon the police to save my home, but then a third figure walked into the center of the camera frame. My thumb froze in midair. It was a woman. She was not wearing a ski mask. She was not rushing or looking around in fear. She walked with a casual, sweeping authority, pointing a perfectly manicured finger toward my dining room, directing one of the thugs to go grab the silver flatware. It was Barbara, my own mother. My vision tunneled. The ringing in my ears completely drowned out the hum of the office lights. I stared at the tiny screen, desperate for it to be a trick of the light, a glitch in the software, anything but reality. But the camera zoomed and tracked her movement, capturing her features in crystal clear night vision as she turned her head to inspect a painting on the wall. The motion sensor spotlight outside my window caught her neckline, resting right against her collarbone. Glittering with a blinding, icy blue fire was a heavy sapphire pendant. The breath was instantly knocked out of my lungs. That was my grandmother's necklace. It was a priceless family heirloom that Barbara had tearfully sworn on her life was stolen from her hotel room exactly 10 years ago. I had spent months consoling her back then, helping her pay off massive debts because she claimed the loss had devastated her emotionally and financially. In an instant, the burning panic inside me evaporated. It did not fade away. It flash froze into a block of solid, heavy ice. The woman who had given birth to me was standing in the middle of my living room, coordinating a home invasion to rob me blind, proudly wearing the very lie she had spun a decade earlier. I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. A terrifying, Unnatural calm washed over my brain, shutting down every emotion that made me a loving daughter. I moved my thumb away from the police dial icon. Instead, I tapped the screen and hit the master record button, ensuring every single frame of this ultimate betrayal was securely uploaded and locked into my encrypted cloud storage. I sat in the dead silence of the logistics office and watched my mother direct the destruction of my life for another 7 minutes. I watched them zip up the bags. I watched Barbara check her reflection in my hallway mirror, adjusting the stolen sapphire before slipping out the front door. When the living room was empty and dark again, I closed the application. I slowly stood up, gathered my files, and packed my laptop into my leather bag. I turned off my desk lamp and walked out to my car. As I drove through the desolate city streets, gripping the steering wheel, a brilliant, vicious plan began to take root in the back of my mind. I was going to go home and call the authorities. I was going to play the devastated, terrified victim perfectly. I would not let them know I had seen a single second of their performance. I was going to play this sick game to the very bitter end. I pulled into my driveway just past midnight. The front door was ajar. The heavy deadbolt lock splintered and hanging from the wooden frame by a single bent screw. Walking into the living room, I forced myself to take in the physical devastation of my personal sanctuary. Glass from my smashed custom coffee table glittered across the Persian rug like crushed ice. The empty spaces on the walls and the bare bookshelves screamed of violation. I stood in the center of the wreckage, took a deep breath to steady my racing pulse, and began my performance. I dialed 911. When the emergency dispatcher answered the line, I let my voice crack perfectly. I forced my breathing to become shallow and rapid. "Please, you have to help me. I just got home from work and my house has been completely robbed. They took everything. I am so terrified." I sounded flawlessly pathetic, the absolute picture of a naive, helpless victim. The local police arrived within 15 minutes, shining their flashlights, taking notes, and dusting for fingerprints that I already knew belonged to hired muscle. The next morning, the doorbell rang. It was the cavalry, my mother, Barbara, and my younger brother, Trent, stood on my front porch, their faces painted with identical masks of exaggerated tragedy. Trent pushed past me first, puffing out his chest, inspecting the broken doorframe as if he were a seasoned homicide detective instead of a 28-year-old man who still brought his dirty laundry to his mother's house on Sundays. "I absolutely cannot believe this happened, Simone," Trent declared, shaking his head with a heavy sigh. "This neighborhood is going right down the drain. You should have bought a place in a secure gated community like I told you." Right behind him was Barbara. She rushed forward and threw her arms around my shoulders, letting out a dramatic, breathy sob. "Oh, my poor, sweet girl," she wailed, burying her face in my shoulder. "When you called me this morning, I nearly had a fatal heart attack. Thank God you were stuck at that boring office of yours and not home when those monsters broke in." I patted her back mechanically, my eyes immediately drawn to her neck, tightly wound around her throat. Knotted with elegant precision was a vibrant, floral Hermes silk scarf. It was the middle of July, and the temperature outside was already pushing 85 degrees. She was wearing a thick winter accessory for one reason only: to conceal the heavy silver chain and the stolen sapphire pendant I had seen on the high-definition security footage the night before. The sheer audacity of it almost made me want to smile. "I am fine, Mom. Just a little shaken up," I replied, pulling away just enough to look her directly in the eyes. Her makeup was absolutely flawless, as always. Not a single tear had actually fallen to ruin her expensive mascara. Looking at the two of them, standing in my ruined living room, preaching about safety and success, a bitter taste flooded the back of my mouth. They were a pair of perfectly groomed parasites. For my entire adult life, I had been the designated family punchline at every Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas gathering. Barbara would raise a glass of expensive champagne and toast to Trent's brilliant future. Trent would laugh, wearing a bespoke suit, and tell the extended relatives that I was the slow and steady turtle of the family. "Simone is good old reliable," he would say with a condescending smirk. Someone has to push the paper and do the boring logistics while the rest of us change the world. I used to grip my fork under the table, swallowing the humiliation because I believed that supporting them was my ultimate duty. I thought I was protecting my flesh and blood. I never realized I was just financing my own emotional abuse. What the rest of the extended family did not know, and what Trent and Barbara were far too arrogant to ever figure out, was that I was their secret bank. I was the invisible, silent foundation holding up their grand, pathetic illusions of wealth. 3 years ago, when Barbara was about to lose her luxury high-rise condominium to foreclosure, I set up a blind trust through a boutique legal firm. I signed reams of paperwork under a corporate alias. I funneled a massive portion of my corporate logistics bonuses and smart stock investments into that trust. Every month, on the first day of the month, that anonymous trust quietly transferred exactly $5,850 to cover the mortgage and maintenance fees on Barbara's pristine apartment. She proudly told her country club friends that a wealthy, distant admirer had set up a grant for her boutique interior design business, a business that had not booked a single paying client in 4 years. And then there was Trent, my golden boy brother, the self-proclaimed tech genius. For the past 2 years, he had been living off a massive seed funding grant for his supposed revolutionary software startup. The capital came from a venture firm called Apex Solutions. He loved to brag about his rigorous board meetings and his brilliant corporate backers. He loved to sneer at my practical, mundane career. He had absolutely no idea that Apex Solutions was just a registered shell company. I was the sole shareholder. I was the one who authorized the wire transfer of $250,000 to his business account. He spent the first $50,000 on a lavish launch party for an application that did not even have a working prototype. He was playing a successful chief executive officer entirely on my dime. They bled me dry, took my money through the shadows, and then mocked the very hands that fed them in the light. But why this? Why stage a violent robbery? As I watched Barbara nervously adjust her heavy silk scarf, the final puzzle piece snapped into place in my analytical mind. Las Vegas, last month. Barbara had taken a 2-week trip to Nevada. A mutual friend had let it slip that Barbara had been spending 14 hours a day at the high-stakes baccarat tables. She must have racked up a gambling debt that easily exceeded $100,000. The ruthless casino loan sharks do not care about an anonymous trust paying a mortgage in Chicago. They demand liquid assets. She needed quick, untraceable money. So, she decided to harvest her own daughter. She hired thugs to clean out my valuables, planning to sell my antique clocks, my designer bags, and my expensive electronics on the black market to cover her degenerate gambling losses. And she simply could not resist wearing the ultimate prize, my grandmother's sapphire, a priceless piece she had faked losing a decade ago just to squeeze sympathy money out of my late father and me. "We will get through this, sweetie," Barbara cooed, stepping in for another tight, suffocating embrace. Family sticks together in times of crisis. That is what matters most. I let her hold me. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I simply stood perfectly still, breathing in the air around her, my nose filled with the heavy, intoxicating scent of Baccarat Rouge perfume. It was a fragrance that cost nearly $400 a bottle purchased with the money I had sacrificed, worn by a woman who had just hired criminals to destroy my home. "You are absolutely right, Mom," I whispered softly, my voice devoid of any real warmth. "Family is everything." As she stroked my hair, playing the role of the devoted, protective mother, she had no idea that the daughter she thought was a weak, boring pushover had died the night before. In her place stood a woman who knew exactly how to dismantle their entire world, dollar by dollar, lie by lie. The board was set. The foundation of their lies was fully exposed, and I held every single winning piece. The police were utterly useless, entirely bogged down by bureaucracy and standard procedures. I did not need them to solve a crime I had already witnessed in high definition. I needed surgical precision. Within 48 hours of the staged break-in, I hired an elite, independent private investigation firm based out of New York. They specialized in high asset recovery and white-collar fraud, operating far outside the sluggish pace of local law enforcement. I paid their exorbitant retainer fee in cash and gave them one simple directive: track the fence. I knew my mother did not have the street connections to pawn custom antique clocks and original oil paintings on her own. She needed a specialized middleman to move stolen luxury goods. 4 days later, a heavily encrypted dossier arrived in my secure email inbox. The investigators had tracked down a mid-level broker operating out of a sketchy, failing art gallery in the downtown district. The digital file contained crisp, long-lens photographs of Barbara meeting with this man in a dimly lit alley behind the building. She was attempting to auction off my stolen art collection on the underground black market. She was using a ridiculous, theatrical pseudonym, but her signature oversized designer sunglasses and arrogant posture were unmistakable. The investigators confirmed that a private, invitation-only auction was scheduled for the end of the month, where my belongings would be liquidated to cover her massive gambling debts. With the physical evidence secured, it was time to systematically dismantle the financial fortress I had secretly built for her. I sat in the dead silence of my home office, illuminated only by the harsh, icy blue glow of my dual monitors. I logged into the highly secure administrative portal of the blind trust managing Barbara's luxury condominium. The interface was sterile and complex, a labyrinth of legal clauses, asset management protocols, and offshore routing numbers. I bypassed the standard withdrawal procedures and navigated directly to the beneficiary revocation tab. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard with brutal, emotionless efficiency. I executed a series of irrevocable stop payment orders on all future mortgage transfers. I drafted a legally binding termination notice, severing her status as a beneficiary by invoking a hidden contingency clause regarding moral turpitude and criminal liability. I scheduled the trust dissolution to take effect silently. She would not receive a single warning notification until the bank officially flagged her account for severe delinquency. I pressed the enter key. The screen flashed a bright green confirmation message. The invisible safety net beneath my mother was officially shredded into pieces. Next, I turned my attention to Trent, my brilliant, entrepreneurial brother who loved to mock my predictable, boring logistics career. I opened the encrypted financial ledgers for Apex Solutions, the shell company I had created to fund his imaginary tech empire. As the sole majority shareholder and anonymous director, I had unrestricted backdoor access to every single corporate bank statement and expense report. What I found was not just gross negligence, it was textbook, prosecutable financial fraud. The $250,000 seed capital I had provided was nearly gone. Trent had not hired a single software developer. There was no source code, no beta testing phase, no product roadmap. Instead, the ledger was a digital monument to his pathetic vanity and delusions of grandeur. I pulled up the itemized transaction history, my eyes scanning the devastating proof. $40,000 had been wired directly to an exotic car dealership for the down payment on a custom matte black Porsche 911. Thousands of dollars were bleeding out weekly to pay for VIP table service at premium nightclubs, luxury steakhouse dinners, and spontaneous weekend trips to Miami. He even went as far as creating phantom vendors in the accounting software, forging fake invoices for consulting services to cover his massive bar tabs. He was systematically embezzling my money to fund a playboy lifestyle. Utterly convinced that the faceless venture capitalists at Apex Solutions were too wealthy and detached to ever audit a genius like him, I downloaded every single receipt, every fraudulent invoice, and compiled a massive, devastating legal packet. Now came the masterpiece of my retaliation. Stopping them was not enough. I needed them to actively destroy themselves. Using the intelligence gathered by my private investigators, I orchestrated a highly sophisticated financial trap. Through a series of proxy servers and anonymous burner accounts, my investigators contacted the black market art dealer, posing as a wealthy, paranoid overseas buyer highly interested in purchasing my stolen paintings. We negotiated a premium price, one that would guarantee Barbara could pay off her Vegas loan sharks. but we insisted on a strict, non-negotiable condition. The funds had to be routed through a highly secure third-party digital escrow account to ensure the safe transfer of the physical goods before the money was released. The broker, eager for his massive commission, pressured Barbara to accept the terms. What my mother did not know was that the specific escrow platform I forced them to use required rigorous federal identity verification under the strict guidelines of international banking regulations. To access the held funds, Barbara had to register the receiving account under her true legal name and connect it directly to her primary Social Security number. The trap was exquisitely cruel because it relied entirely on her own greed. The moment the suspicious overseas money hit that escrow account, the digital footprint would be irrevocably tied to her identity. It was a perfectly laid snare. The transaction would automatically trigger severe anti-money laundering protocols within the federal banking system, effectively turning a simple fencing operation into a major, highly traceable federal financial crime. Despite setting explosive charges under every pillar of their lives, I maintained my weekly routine perfectly. That Sunday, I attended our traditional family dinner at Barbara's pristine apartment, the very apartment I had just pushed to the absolute brink of foreclosure. I sat at the grand mahogany dining table, calmly slicing into a medium-rare roast beef. The expensive crystal chandelier above us cast a warm, inviting glow, completely at odds with the venom coursing through my veins. "The economy is just an absolute disaster right now," Barbara sighed dramatically, taking a delicate sip of her vintage red wine, the heavy stolen sapphire resting proudly against her skin. "It is so incredibly hard for ambitious people to get ahead with all these terrible taxes and regulations." "Tell me about it," Trent chimed in, checking his brand-new diamond-encrusted watch, purchased with my stolen funds. "My investors are being incredibly demanding about our next quarter projections. Running a tech startup is exhausting. Simone, you are lucky you just have to deal with basic shipping schedules and boring spreadsheets." I looked up from my porcelain plate, chewing my food slowly. I let a soft, perfectly practiced smile spread across my face. I nodded sympathetically, playing the flawless role of the quiet, supportive, slightly dim sister beneath the heavy linen tablecloth. My hands were perfectly steady. I looked deeply into my mother's eyes, and then slowly glanced over at my brother's smug, punchable face. My gaze was as sharp and cold as a surgical scalpel, hidden safely behind my usual resigned demeanor. They were feasting on their own arrogance, completely unaware that the structural columns of their world had already been demolished, and gravity was about to do the rest. There were no dramatic screaming matches. There was no grand confrontation where I flipped a table and exposed their sins. True vengeance does not require a raised voice. It requires gravity. I simply stepped aside and let the weight of their own arrogance crush them into dust. The chain reaction began on the first Tuesday of the month, precisely at 9 o'clock in the morning. For 3 years, the property management firm for Barbara's luxury condominium had received a guaranteed wire transfer. This month, the automated clearinghouse system returned a fatal error code. Insufficient funds. Account terminated. Barbara found out on a Thursday afternoon. I had remotely accessed her email server through a backdoor I installed years ago when I set up her new laptop. I watched her inbox populate in real time. The official notice from the National Bank arrived with a bold red subject line. It was a formal declaration of severe delinquency and an intent to initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings. The blind trust was gone, completely dissolved without a trace, leaving her entirely exposed to a mortgage she could not even begin to comprehend, let alone afford. Barely 24 hours later, the executioner came for Trent. My brother was likely nursing a severe hangover from another night of bottle service when the notification from Apex Solutions chimed on his phone. I had drafted the email myself, utilizing the heavy, terrifying jargon of corporate litigation. The message was sent from the senior legal counsel of the venture capital firm. It bluntly stated that the anonymous investors had conducted a forensic audit of his business accounts and discovered gross financial irregularities. The email outlined, in agonizing detail, the exact dates and amounts of his fraudulent wire transfers to the exotic car dealership and the fake vendor invoices. The final paragraph was a lethal blow. It declared an immediate withdrawal of all remaining seed capital due to a catastrophic breach of contract. Furthermore, it explicitly threatened a massive civil lawsuit for corporate embezzlement and wire fraud if the missing funds were not replenished within 7 business days. Trent was instantly transformed from a visionary chief executive officer into a terrified little boy staring down the barrel of a federal prison sentence. The psychological pressure was compounding rapidly, forming an invisible vice around their throats. Desperation is a terrifying disease, and I watched it infect my mother next, with her condo under threat and her Las Vegas loan sharks breathing down her neck. Barbara desperately tried to finalize the black market art sale. From the safety of my encrypted server, I monitored the digital escrow account. The overseas proxy buyer had deposited the negotiated funds. Barbara, completely blinded by her panic, logged in using her real name and social security number, just as the system demanded. She clicked the button to initiate the transfer to her personal checking account. Instantly, I triggered the network override I had prepared. Her computer screen did not show a confirmation. Instead, a massive yellow warning banner locked her out of the portal. The error message stated that the transaction was permanently frozen, pending a federal investigation for suspected money laundering activities. The system advised her that local law enforcement and the Internal Revenue Service had been automatically notified of the anomalous overseas transfer. She had essentially signed a digital confession to fencing stolen goods, and she was now entirely locked out of the cash she desperately needed to survive. The fallout was instantaneous and utterly delicious. By Friday evening, my phone was ringing incessantly. I sat on my new leather sofa, sipping a glass of chilled white wine, watching the caller identification screen flash their names over and over again. Trent called 14 times. Barbara called 22 times. They left frantic, breathless voicemails, their voices cracking with raw terror. They begged me to pick up, claiming there was a massive family emergency, a temporary cash flow crisis that only I could solve. They needed a bridge loan. They needed my reliable, boring logistics salary to save them from ruin. On the 23rd ring, I finally answered. I did not say hello. I simply let out a heavy, exhausted sigh. "Simone, oh my God, finally," Barbara gasped, her voice shrill and trembling. "Listen to me. Something terrible has happened with the trust fund, and Trent is having a major issue with his investors. We need you to wire us $50,000 right now. It is just a temporary crisis, sweetie. I promise we will pay you back." I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the silence stretch out, forcing her to stew in her own panic. "I am so sorry, Mom," I replied, my voice completely flat and hollow. "I cannot help you. Corporate just announced a massive restructuring this morning. They are cutting salaries by 30% across the board to avoid layoffs. I barely have enough in my checking account to cover my own rent and replace the things those thugs stole from my living room. I am completely broke." "What do you mean you are broke?" Trent yelled from the background, having put the call on speakerphone. "You always have savings. Take out a personal loan. Max out your credit cards. Do you not understand what is at stake here? They are going to take my car. They are going to take the apartment." "I cannot do it, Trent," I said, injecting just enough fake sadness into my tone to make it sound genuine. "I have absolutely nothing left to give." I hung up the phone before they could utter another word. I turned off my device and tossed it onto the cushion next to me. The silence in my house was no longer a symbol of my loneliness. It was the sweet symphony of my victory. The final threads of Barbara's sanity unraveled over the weekend. The perfectly manicured socialite was dead. Through the lens of the private investigator tracking her movements, I saw the physical toll the stress had taken on her. The latest photograph showed a woman who looked like she had aged 10 years in 3 days. Her flawless makeup was completely gone, replaced by deep, dark circles under her hollow eyes. Her hair was unwashed and pulled back into a messy knot. The elegant designer dresses were replaced by a stained gray sweater. The Las Vegas collectors were tired of waiting. The escrow money was locked away in a federal trap. She was out of options, out of time, and out of minds to manipulate. She made the only desperate move she had left. On Monday morning, Barbara walked out of her luxury building clutching a small velvet box. She bypassed the high-end jewelry appraisers, who would ask too many questions. Instead, she hailed a cab and directed it toward the largest, most heavily guarded pawn shop in the industrial district of the city. She was going to sell my grandmother's stolen sapphire for pennies on the dollar just to save her own skin. It was the ultimate act of betrayal, and it was the exact move I needed to set the final stage. The pawn shop had completely refused her. The head appraiser had taken one look at the flawless, untreated salon sapphire and immediately demanded a certified provenance paper, threatening to call the authorities if she could not prove legal ownership. Terrified, Barbara had snatched the velvet box and fled back into the harsh daylight. With no quick cash to appease the Vegas collectors, she had to pivot to her final, most desperate illusion: the annual Chicago Winter Charity Gala. It was a $10,000-a-plate event, a glittering congregation of the wealthiest families in the state. She and Trent were attending on tickets purchased months in advance, back when my money was still freely funding their charade. Barbara believed that if she paraded around the grand ballroom with a priceless heirloom resting against her collarbone, she could project enough stability to con a naive socialite into a massive, unsecured personal loan. The grand ballroom of the hotel was a suffocating ocean of forced elegance. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm golden light over tables draped in heavy white linen. The air was thick with the scent of expensive white orchids and imported champagne. I stood in the shadowed alcove of the mezzanine, watching them from above. Down below, Barbara was holding a crystal flute of sparkling wine, forcing a strained, brittle smile as she conversed with a real estate mogul. She had spent hours masking her exhaustion with layers of premium cosmetics, but the panic in her eyes was glaringly obvious to anyone paying attention. Next to her, Trent was aggressively swirling a glass of scotch, checking his phone every 30 seconds, his leg bouncing with the nervous energy of a cornered animal. They were completely convinced that I was sitting alone in my ransacked house, weeping over my stolen television. They believed I was a tragic, invisible peasant who could never possibly penetrate this fortress of high society. They were wrong. When the heavy oak doors of the main entrance swung open, the string quartet playing in the corner seemed to fade into the background. I did not walk in looking like the tired logistics manager they loved to belittle. I glided onto the plush carpet wearing a custom-tailored, backless emerald green silk gown that draped flawlessly to the floor. My hair was swept up into a sharp, elegant twist, and my posture was absolute steel. I was not alone. Resting comfortably in the crook of my arm was the hand of Marcus Thorne, the billionaire chief executive officer of Aegis Horizon Logistics. Marcus and I had spent the last 3 years working closely together to restructure his global supply chain. He respected my intellect, valued my ruthlessness, and was more than happy to escort his top executive to a charity dinner. The moment I stepped into the light, heads began to turn, and then Barbara saw me. From 50 feet away, I watched the color rapidly drain from my mother's face. The strained smile completely vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. Her jaw actually slackened. Trent followed her gaze, and I saw his grip tighten so hard around his scotch glass that I thought the crystal might shatter in his hand. I offered a brilliant, radiant smile directly to them and gently guided Marcus across the crowded floor. We navigated through the sea of billionaires and politicians, charting a direct course for the table where my parasites were standing. "Good evening, Mother," I purred as I approached, my voice carrying a smooth, melodic confidence she had never heard from me before. "Trent, what a delightful surprise to see you both here." Barbara opened her mouth to speak, but her throat seemed completely paralyzed. Her eyes darted wildly between my expensive gown, the powerful executive standing beside me, and the confident smirk playing on my lips. "Simone," Trent choked out, his voice cracking slightly. "What in the world are you doing here? How did you even get past the front door?" "I was invited." "Trent," I replied smoothly, signaling a passing waiter to take 2 glasses of champagne from his silver tray. I handed one to Marcus and raised the other toward my family. I manage the global logistics for Marcus here. We handle billion-dollar shipping routes. It turns out, my boring office job pays quite well when you are not actively throwing your money into a black hole. I took a slow sip of my drink, my eyes locking onto the heavy sapphire resting on Barbara's chest. That is a truly stunning necklace. Mom, it looks so familiar. It is a miracle you found something so exquisite to wear, especially considering the terrible luck we have had with amateur thieves lately. Barbara flinched as if I had physically struck her across the face. A bead of sweat broke through the thick foundation on her forehead. I have no idea what you are talking about, she whispered frantically, glancing around to see if anyone nearby was listening. Keep your voice down. Simone, you are going to cause a scene. Oh, I would never cause a scene, I smiled, stepping just a fraction of an inch closer to her. The suffocating tension between us felt heavier than the crystal chandeliers overhead. I am just marveling at how things always seem to find their way back to their rightful owners. Family inheritances are funny like that. Sometimes people try to steal them, try to sell them in dark alleys, try to pawn them to fix their dirty little gambling problems. But the truth always comes back to bite them. Do you not agree? Trent slammed his empty glass onto the table, his face flushing violently red with sudden rage. Listen to me, you smug little, he started to snarl, taking a threatening step toward me. He never finished his sentence. A loud, aggressive vibration echoed from Trent's tuxedo pocket. His phone was ringing. Then it pinged with the text message. Then another. He pulled the device out, his furious expression morphing into sheer terror as he read the notifications illuminating the screen. No, wait, Trent stammered, tapping the screen frantically. This cannot be right. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the hotel ballroom, we had a perfect view of the valet turnaround. A heavy industrial tow truck with flashing yellow lights had just aggressively backed up to the front entrance. The driver was currently securing thick metal chains around the axles of a custom matte black Porsche 911. The repossession agency hired by Apex Solutions did not care about the valet attendants shouting at them, and they certainly did not care about ruining a high society gala. They were taking back the vehicle I had paid for. Trent stood completely frozen, watching through the glass as the physical manifestation of his fake success was literally dragged away into the night. He could not even run outside to stop them without exposing to the entire charity gala that his venture capital firm was repossessing his assets. The silence at our table was absolute perfection. But the main event was only just arriving. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom opened once more. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly, the temperature dropping as the polite chatter died down. Two men walked through the entrance. They were not wearing $10,000 tuxedos. They were wearing standard issue, off-the-rack gray suits, and their eyes scanned the room with predatory authority. They were plainclothes financial crimes detectives from the State Bureau of Investigation. One of them was clutching a thick manila case file tightly in his left hand. They did not stop at the reception desk. They did not mingle. They cut a direct, unyielding path through the crowd, heading straight toward the terrified woman wearing a stolen sapphire necklace. The trap had officially sprung, and there was absolutely nowhere left for them to run. The two detectives came to a complete halt right in front of our table. The taller of the two, a man with cold, unblinking eyes, pulled a silver badge from his jacket pocket. "Barbara Hester," he announced, his voice carrying clearly over the dead silence of the ballroom. "You are under arrest for federal insurance fraud and the attempted interstate fencing of stolen luxury goods." Barbara let out a pathetic, strangled gasp. No, there has been a terrible mistake. I have not stolen anything. The anonymous digital evidence file we received this morning says otherwise, the second detective replied, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. It perfectly details a fraudulent insurance payout from 10 years ago, alongside your recent digital footprint in a black market escrow trap. The high society guests surrounding us began to aggressively whisper, stepping back as if my mother had suddenly contracted a highly contagious disease. I calmly unlatched the clasp of my designer clutch. I reached inside and pulled out a sharply folded, heavily notarized legal document. I turned to the lead detective and offered him the paper. Detective, I said, my voice steady and crystalline. This is the original, certified last will and testament of my late grandmother. I believe it clearly proves that I am the sole, legal owner of the sapphire pendant currently resting around this woman's neck. She staged a robbery at my home 5 days ago to acquire it. The detective quickly scanned the document, nodded once, and looked at Barbara. I did not wait for the police to ask her to remove it. I stepped directly into my mother's personal space. Her eyes were wide, filled with a frantic, animalistic terror. I reached my hands around the back of her neck. My fingers brushed against her cold, clammy skin as I found the silver clasp. With one sharp, deliberate motion, I unhooked the chain. The heavy jewel slid away from her collarbone and fell perfectly into the palm of my hand. I am officially recovering my stolen property, I stated, stepping back. The reality of her total destruction finally shattered Barbara's fragile facade. She lunged forward, her perfectly manicured hands grabbing at my forearms. She burst into loud, ugly sobs, completely ignoring the horrified stares of the billionaires surrounding us. "Simone, please," she wailed, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. "You have to bail me out. You have to talk to them. Pay off the casino people. Sweetie, I am your mother. You cannot let them do this to me." I did not pull away. I leaned in close, my lips hovering mere inches from her ear. "That luxury apartment you live in," I whispered, my tone dropping to a dead, freezing pitch. "That anonymous blind trust you bragged about. It was all me, every single dollar. And now, I have cut the cord. There is an eviction notice coming for you next Tuesday." I pulled back and watched the final spark of hope violently extinguish behind her eyes. Her mouth opened and closed in silent, absolute horror. The detectives moved in, roughly spinning her around and snapping the cold steel cuffs securely over her wrists. To my right, Trent had literally collapsed into one of the empty dining chairs. He was staring blankly at the floor, his phone having slipped from his trembling hands. His imaginary empire was completely bankrupt, his sports car was gone, and he was staring down the barrel of federal embezzlement charges. I did not offer either of them another word. I raised my hands and fastened my grandmother's sapphire securely around my own neck. It felt incredibly heavy, beautifully cold, and absolutely perfect. I turned my back on the pathetic scene, took Marcus by the arm, and walked out of the grand ballroom. I left the malignant tumor I used to call family behind me, stepping out into the crisp, cool Chicago night, breathing free for the very first time in my life. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. I would absolutely love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's journey compelling, please remember that YouTube has completely shut down our monetization, leaving us without the budget to keep this channel alive. We will not be uploading any new videos here in the near future and are moving our entire operation over to Patreon. Please help us keep these stories going by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community. There, you will get access to our absolute best, longest, and most detailed exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can scan the Patreon QR code currently on your screen, or use the direct link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Stay strong, stay sharp, and I will see you there.